Yes, I mean it was that time. Punk had arrived, and as Goldmine eloquently put it, it was by the time the Geese the Ghost came out, not even most prog fans like prog anymore. It's a mischievous comment, but Wise Arthur event was definitely out of time in that respect. So, or rather, the follow-up album to Geese the Ghost was out of time. So it was pressure to do songs. I mean, long instrumentals and a dreamy, what we would now call sort of impressionistic sort of prog albums with, lots of funny changes in sections and sort of esoteric sort of themes were right up. It was back to basics kind of stuff, which was pretty strange. Having gone through what I always felt was a kind of organic, natural growth, through pop songs, through to the Beatles doing Day in the Life, through to some of the fantastic stuff on the albums in the later 60s and stuff that we now call, what was sort of underground and then prog. So it was quite weird. It was very weird. It was very disconcerting, and it was bizarre, really. Suddenly having this pressure to nothing wrong with songs, but it was the sort of edict that was coming down from on high. And of course, you couldn't record at home in those days unless you had oodles of money. So you were at the beck and call of record companies. So if you didn't record and come up with what they wanted, you didn't go in the studio and get to realise your music. So I was put together with a very good producer who was Rupert, who was a tremendously encouraging man and very patient. And I was, having worked with Mike Rutherford, I was really quite unsure of myself solo. Mike and I went back so far. So, and Rupert was really sort of taught me through, and both Michael Giles and John Perry were phenomenally generous and patient again, and good in terms of helping the songs be sort of formatted and all the rest of it. I don't remember there being too much debate about, whereas on Sides there was, the next album, there was some debate about instrumentals, but I don't think there was much debate about whether it was going to be instrumental. I don't really recall. I think it just seemed like, this is song time, buddy, so don't argue. And I just thought, well, I've got quite a few song fragments, let's see what we can come up with. Yes, I think the only difference is that then we were in the reviews were in a sort of macrocosmic world, weren't they? Where you were being reviewed by people whose taste was very diverse, and they were covering all sorts of areas of music. Now they were biased against this kind of thing, obviously. And the flip side of it is that they tend to be reviewed now by what I would call the sort of captive press. It doesn't mean to say they're going to like it, but probably they're not going to lacerate it and heap vitriol on you. So you've got a better chance than a fair hearing. Nevertheless, I think the amount of praise and the type of thing said was surprising, and it made me feel, well, yeah, this has obviously stood the test of time, which is great, because a lot of people judging, listening, are a generation or so on. I think it's a mixture. It's pleasant in some respects because you hear things broken up, and you hear nice overdubs and things that went. It's like sort of seeing the constituent parts. But then obviously at the same time, some of them you're not sure about. You think, oh, I'm not sure about that. And you start listening to things separate, where somehow it's all worked even though there have been slight errors in timing or whatever tuning, and this is the whole point, is that when you sometimes unlock the whole thing, it can be quite disconcerting. Things can quite sort of almost fall apart, really. You sort of got there, in a way you got there by accident, by happy accident sometimes, and things sort of work by chance. But if you strip down the individual things, sometimes it does. I remember Jonathan King saying to us that the Beatles' backing harmonies were out of tune on something which he'd heard. You know, thought it was like heresy to me, that. But so sometimes when you actually unpick stuff, it doesn't sound that great by itself. So when it was being assembled, there were one or two bad moments, thinking, I'm not sure about that. But then sort of reassembling, it's always a risky process, which can incur the disappointment of Rod the fans, who very much got used to hearing things one way. It's dangerous. But it was done very lovingly by Simon Hayworth and Andy Miles, and I think hopefully we brought it off.
Hear a west wind calling, I hear it calling my name. Snow on Greenland falling, the ice is melting away.
The strange thing is, it seems to have in some way lasted in some odd ways that one couldn't really have expected, because there was a sample from the album that was very nearly used. Well, it was actually used by Frank Ocean, the rap artist, but then the version with that didn't get onto the album. It's a different producer, and I've actually been in touch with the producer who did use it, who is called 88 Keys, and he apparently he sampled, this is a US rap guy in New York now, and he's been sampling merrily lots of stuff of Wise After the Event. And in fact, we've recently had a sample request for the use of the, well, they call it keyboard figure, in fact, piano figure. In fact, the figure is piano, Hammond drawbars, and real harp, which Jeremy Gilbert played at the end of Now What Are They Doing to My Little Friends, and that that goes right the way through this entire thundering rap track with rap lyrics on top. So it's kind of interesting how certain albums have things that people in later generations just sort of pick out. So it didn't sort of die with its time, as it were. It seems to have legs in some respects. So that's great. You know, who knows what might happen in 40 years' time when I'm not around.